Brother Crozier's view was repudiated by questions on doctrine, and Mrs. White's view on the subject was Crozier's view. This is very significant because when we met, when you were, as you remember before, beginning college, I was meeting with Theodore Heppenstall and Dr. Murdoch and the top theologians of the denomination. And we were discussing this very issue. Dr. George Kennan, now professor of New Testament Greek at Bethel Theological Seminary in St. Paul, took his Greek New Testament out. It's as fresh in my mind as if it happened yesterday. And he said, "Brethren, I should like to set forth a question." He said, "If you'll open your testaments." Heppenstall and Murdoch opened their testaments to Hebrews chapter 9. And Kennan read, and I followed with him, that Jesus Christ entered once into the holiest of all with his own blood, having obtained eternal redemption for us. And I asked the question, and Kennan did too. Did this take place, as Crozier said, as Mrs. White said, as the early Adventists taught? Did it take place in 1844? Or did it take place at the ascension of Jesus Christ? The Greek text says, at the ascension of Jesus Christ, once into the holiest of all, the most holy place. The general conclusion was that the text of Hebrews left no doubt whatsoever that at the ascension, Jesus Christ entered into the holiest of all with his own blood, having obtained that redemption for us. 1844 was not included in Hebrews chapter 9. It was written long before 1844. Crozier said no. Mrs. White said no. James White said no. The early Adventists said no. They were wrong. The Greek text is right. It's a question of whether you're going to accept the text of the Scripture or the interpretation of Mrs. White over that text, which brings me back to the basic question I was discussing before. Is Mrs. White the interpreter of Scripture to the denomination? Answer, on the investigative judgment of the sanctuary, she most certainly is. She is not over Scripture. She made mistakes. She made false statements. Mrs. White made a statement that I think every Seventh-day Adventist ought to know and memorize. Mrs. White said that in a straight line, she had never uttered a heretical statement. She said that clearly. I never uttered a heretical statement. I will demonstrate to the world that she denied the deity of Jesus Christ, which is, at one her career, heresy of the Arian variety, which was espoused by Uriah Smith and the early Adventists who influenced Ellen White. Later, she smartened up and she said this is wrong, and thoughtful Seventh-day Adventist scholars just expunged it, the way Arthur White goes through with his little pen and removes sections from your documents and ellipses. I'm collecting right now a whole series of Arthur's little pen and the things that you've changed through the years. It's scary to see things Seventh-day Adventists don't know are going on, things that are being taken out of Mrs. White. Mrs. White at one time denied the Trinity, and the deity of Christ. Mrs. White at one time was vigorous in affirming doctrines which she later turned around 100% and repudiated. When she was writing that you shouldn't eat pork and lobsters and crabs, she was munching on oysters, and there were eyewitness testimonies of that. Mrs. White was far from the prophetic voice that is being manifested in Adventist contemporary Adventist literature. I also think, as Newsweek magazine indicates, she borrowed from people without stating it. And if you're familiar with the Foy vision at all, you know that she plagiarized from Foy chapter and verse, line upon line.